All right, hello everyone. I'm here with Kristin Fontana, and we're beginning our Uranus through the 12 houses series. So today we're going to talk about Uranus in the first house. And Kristin found some really sweet images. Is it moving? It was
Well, it
moving on
was
my
moving
end.
when I emailed it to you, but I can't see it moving now.
Yeah, now that I'm sharing the screen, this image is actually a moving image, which is pretty awesome. And then this one too. Oh, there you go. Is it moving now?
Yes, it is. Oh,
Yeah.
that's cool.
Uranus in the first house. Uranus in the first house. So very descriptive, beautiful images. So did you want to start just speaking a little bit to the Uranus retrograde archetype?
I think a great way to start this new year, 2022, because we've been living with all of us, Uranus retrograde through transit for months now, since the end of August or middle of August. And on the 18th of January, Uranus will station direct again and won't shift retrograde until the end of August this year. So the last handful of months, undoubtedly, there have been things that are getting unlocked inside of you, unlocked your past, your history, with Uranus and Saturn recently squaring each other 3 times in a big way last year, finally finishing that square around Christmas. It really is a time for transformation and deconditioning and looking at old wounds, because Uranus does connect to unresolved trauma and that we bring into this life. And so at times we're forced to look at it, and we're forced to address what we're holding in the subconscious. Uranus, as I believe Ari shared last time, connects to our long-term memory, the memories that we have in this life long ago, and even 10 years ago and further, things that we can't remember, and all of the memories that we've had from every life leading into this lifetime. And so all of these memories are held in the subconscious, but we can't access them consciously. When we experience Uranus retrograde transit, it can feel like things are getting unlocked from the past, and they just spill into the nervous system, they spill into the bloodstream, and at times it can be overwhelming because you don't really know what piece to pick up first. But this is all intentional through the transit to really pay attention to the things that are repeating. And the content that is becoming unlocked contains 3 different dimensions. The first type is content that connects to your soul's larger, freer future that you imagine for yourself, desire for yourself, the innovative moves you want to make for yourself. That's one piece of it, because we're always looking for changes to support our evolution. You know, what feels like growth for me. The second type of content that gets unlocked, what we're all feeling a lot of, is all of the emotions you've repressed over time. And maybe you repress these emotions because you don't want anybody to know about these memories. You want to run for the hills, and you don't want to be judged for those memories. And so you just repress them and do not deal with them. But they will come up during a Uranus retrograde transit. Now, about 70% of whatever's coming up most likely will not be dealt with. It's just sometimes just too much. But the things that are repeating over and over are things that your soul is wanting to fixate on and grab a hold of. And as I shared in our introduction, the soul really needs to re-enter that fracture, re-enter the wound. It's like a tripwire. Uranus can be that way. We have to re-enter in order to heal it. And sometimes it requires us to either totally relive an experience that caused us trauma, or just the body is feeling that we're reliving that experience, even if it's not actually occurring. It could seem really minor and mellow to somebody else, but on a body level, you're really feeling it. And that's the only way we can heal, because Uranus, which I do want to talk about at some point, when it's retrograde, in particular in a natal chart, but also when through transit, it's unlocking the door to Neptune, right? Neptune follows Uranus, and that's the healer, the healing energy, Pisces. So with a retrograde, whether you have it natally or through transit, you can experience this as a door opening for your healing to happen. And there's a third type of content. See if I can remember this now. I think, well, the third type of content are the memories you've forgotten. Yeah, the second type is the memories you've repressed intentionally.
Mhm.
And the third type can just be the content you've forgotten. So we've got all this content, some content trying to pull you into the future, a great idea that you have, right? Something that you want to do with your life that's leading you forward. And then we've got content you've repressed over time because you wanted to protect yourself and stay distanced from it. And then you have content that you've simply forgotten, that
Mhm.
all of the sudden the soul is remembering. So, that's a lot of information. So just being
So
able
much.
to address the most important things that will lead you into your next steps, that won't create more detachment, because Uranus retrograde does really allow us to detach so we can be objective about ourselves and our lives and look at our life from a safer distance.
Mhm.
So if you're listening to this today, before the 18th, you're still in that Uranus retrograde window. Following that time will be months until the next retrograde when you can implement these changes and really test out some of the growth that you feel has occurred. And I've talked to a lot of people that are really addressing head on some of the stuff that causes them the most stress in their life. And they are feeling liberated because of it.
Mhm.
With Uranus and Aries of the first house, that's a very courageous place for Uranus. It's like now or never. Let's just go for it. So it's important to remember too that a retrograde transit or a natal retrograde is intended to accelerate the evolutionary momentum of your soul. And it's about rebelling or rejecting anything that gets in the way of your own individuation process. Breaking free from old models, old dynamics, making new choices in the face of old dynamics. And evolutionarily speaking, it's really about removing one layer of conditioning after the other. It can be a very faded time. And as I mentioned, it can be a relive experience that's uncomfortable. And it's very non-static. I mean, it always wants to grow. Never during a retrograde will you say, oh, that's it. I've done enough. I'm done growing. You're constantly being pushed. You're growing through the tears, and you're consistently challenging existing limitations. It's important to also remember that the archetype of a retrograde mirrors the archetype of Uranus, what we're talking about in this series. We all have Uranus somewhere. We all have an 11th house, and we have Aquarius somewhere. And so wherever those areas are in your life are where you're probably feeling different. And it's all relative, depending on how many planets you have in Aquarius, how many planets in the 11th house, what aspects is Uranus making, which will reflect the relativity to how much you experience being different. And also, there are plenty of people that do feel different that put on a good act. Maybe they appear to the world like they've got it all together, they're totally in control, but inside they're absolutely wanting to bust loose, break free, and rebel against everything. But there's a fear of being insecure. There's a fear of being alone. There's a fear of being a group of one. So this is an opportunity for you to liberate yourself and to experience really more non-attachment, or just attaching to the truth of what's best for your soul, no matter what it looks like. You just are being given this time where you're not just bathing in it all the time, just like immersed in some kind of like a tea bag, steeping, if that's the right word. When Uranus is a direct, you can really feel emotionally a part of what you're trying to put back together, more so than during a retrograde, even if you're being dropped into all those memories again. So just wanted to remind everybody of the importance of this transition now, and that you will have an opportunity to rework all of these changes and show yourself and experience yourself transforming through the months ahead as we enter and move forward into 2022.
Thank you for that. And that's so characteristic of when any planet is stationing direct. There's that, I mean, I think we're just like 11 days or so, more or less, from this video until Uranus goes direct. It's a pulse on that particular planet. I always think of it as that planet is conjunct itself. And it just emphasizes and highlights where in our own lives we're really called to liberate. And I can't stress enough, Uranus in general, but in particular retrograde, and in particular the stationary points, be it transit or in the natal chart, it's like a whole lot of emphasis on content that we don't necessarily have full memory of. And like you were saying, memories we don't want to have. I think, I don't know where, maybe I read it in the Uranus book by Jeff Green. I think the word he used was past experiences we don't want to contend with, or something like that. Like, I don't want to look at that. That was too much.
Yeah, I want to run from it.
I'm going to suppress that entirely. And it's because, according to our conditioned mind, the ramifications of facing it can be terrifying. And so there's a lot of, there's a need to really be anchored and grounded in that witness mind when the strong Uranian cycles are manifesting, which it is right now. And just to share with everyone, I did a retrograde class series. So on my website, there's a whole class on Uranus retrograde with examples and really good teachings on it. So I definitely recommend that as a great resource. And I also brought this book so that we can all know, just this book exists. This is the old out of print version that I got many years. There we go. Anyone you know who has this version, it's going to look like ours does.
It's falling apart. Oh my God.
It has already fallen apart. You can also get it. I think you can order it now online, reprinted, right?
Yeah, you can.
Yeah. So this is from Jeff Green. It's a good book. Okay, so let's jump into Uranus in the first house. The first house archetype in general corresponds to where each soul is in a constant process of becoming, right? You're going to make choices in life, and your choices are going to open the doors to a whole new set of experiences. It's going to shape your own sense of personal destiny, a sense of direction in life, embedded in the first house experience. This is ascendant, any planet signs in the first house, transits to the first house, is this inherent quality of I need to act, I need to live, I need to make life happen. It's a part of the evolutionary journey that all souls need to make choices. And these choices and the ability and the capacity to know oneself as a choice maker, making decisions, it all reflects back upon an underlying sense of what do I want? What am I here for? What am I going for? And without that quality of self-leadership, we're not going to live. Just like every child in its development needs to be able to assert its will and define and claim stake in its own individual existence. So the first house archetype is really about the individuation of the personal self, the need to actualize one's will in life. So we learn a lot about no. We learn what we're fighting for, what we're going for. And of course, it's a very narrow and generally short-sighted archetype because it's very much on the most gross level of consciousness about what do I need to do now? As we mature in the first house, in general, for any first house expression, I often find there's a growing intelligence and wisdom that develops that's able to see a little more far out, not just immediate gross sensual or instinctual satisfaction, like this is what I need, I'm satisfying an immediate urge to fight or protect or defend, but I'm able to think every action has a consequence. So how am I going to harness this raw energy and, like the metaphor of a good leader or a good warrior, use it consciously with respect to what I'm trying to do in life? Is this going to bring me to where I want to go? So we're really learning how to harness that strong masculine energy in the first house. I remember in the course that I was teaching last year, during one of the segments, I forgot which one, there was a discussion amongst my students. Is paranoia more of a Mars thing or a Uranus thing? Because I found that it can actually be very much, obviously Uranus, we'll talk about that, but also Mars, first house, in the sense that I gotta go where I gotta go. No one stop me. No one get in my way. There can be depending on the signatures related to Mars, the first house, there can be trauma from the past linked to trying to go somewhere, being blocked, being stopped. The archetype of being blocked or stopped or being cut off, or your mission being cut off short, relative to the first house archetype, speaks to the need for the soul to stay in motion, to be able to act and exercise its will and its need for freedom, and that will and that need for freedom being imposed upon and blocked. So it pushes up against where the soul is confronted with a sense of limitation, a sense of I don't have the necessary freedom. And so there can be this like hyper vigilant angst in first house expressions that's always needing to win, always needing to go first. And it might react in ways that isn't consequential to the immediate environment, because there's just that sense of I need to assert my will, I need to get there, I need to make this. And if I don't fight, I won't. Often the fighting is unnecessary, and that's hopefully a lesson that's learned, but it's a very common expression with Mars first house signatures. So I'm using that to introduce the Uranus archetype, because Uranus also corresponds to paranoia for a different reason. So paranoia with Uranus is, well, I'm different. I'm going to get hung. I'm going to be persecuted. I'm going to be outcast. I'm going to be ridiculed. I'm going to be rejected. No one's going to like me. My family won't understand me. All the things that correspond to the ramifications of being oneself. So if everyone could imagine for a moment what might be heightened potentially with the Uranus in the first house. So those are my introductory words, and I'll pass it to you to see if you want to share anything.
I mean, what is heightened is this soul who is going to be rebelling against anybody or anything that's trying to limit them in any way. In any way. So you can imagine them in a relationship, right? If they're wanting more freedom and they're feeling pressure from a partner who they feel instinctually may limit that freedom, and there will be instant rebellion. I mean, they're in a perpetual state of self-discovery, perpetual. And so there's also this inner rebellion that's occurring at the same time. And because it kind of reminds me of just this spinning wheel in a sense, because with Aries, there's this need to experience all these things out in the world. And then you put Uranus in the first, and it is literally like things are happening like lightning speed. Ideas are coming in like lightning speed. And depending on the soul's evolution, they could be way ahead of their time with the stuff that's coming in. So people will think that they've lost their mind, or that is the most outrageous or outlandish thing you could possibly think of. But they're incredible inventors and pioneers of new ways to move the collective forward. But there is going to be also, with the natural square to Cancer, this perpetual state of discovery will create this perpetual state of insecurity at the same time, emotional insecurity. They have no idea where they're going, or they have no idea what's going to happen when they land whatever they've just initiated. So they're always feeling that square to Cancer. They're always feeling alone on their own, and at the same time rebelling against anyone who wants to get close to them or get in the way of what they're trying to accomplish.
That state of constant insecurity is such a strong first house quality, where there's that need to become, to self-individuate, and it's only we can do that. And the anxiety that can arise, and Uranus can be anxiety anywhere. The anxiety with Uranus in the first house is, I need to be myself. There's no precedent for what that looks like. And the path that I'm going to walk has no precedent. No one's walked it before. And
Right.
so relative to that Cancer, it's like there can be so much fear in that. So when we think about what's the core intention of Uranus in the first house, it's to free up the individuality of the soul itself, so that one can make any choices in any moment in time that is relevant to the soul's essential nature. And it's necessary that these choices are gauged from a higher intelligence, so that there is no conditioning or minimal conditioning or a gradual minimalization of conditioning, which would otherwise impact and impede the soul from just seeing the path clearly. So it's freedom from the past in such an essential way, so the path can be realized, which is always going to say the journey that I'm here to walk. One, there's going to be a profound revolutionary quality to it, because anything in the first house, you're trailblazing. You're each step you take, you're opening up the path via your choices. And so there's that need to really be a group of one, as you mentioned, that courage and that bravery to be a leader up unto oneself. And so many Uranus in the first house or Aries examples are souls that were like that. They did their own thing. And often there's an immense amount of lashback or consequence. But we see that there's such an importance of the soul having a sort of, first house can be narcissistic, self-focused. And what's needed in the first house, not in a negative way, is the courage to walk the path that one needs to walk. The issue, however, with Uranus in the first house is, yes, that's needed, and it's going to really set you apart. It might open doors in the world, things that didn't exist before. It might bring you to facing fears or traumas that you've otherwise suppressed. One of the challenges is as you mentioned, the level of reactivity, and the paranoia and that need to not be held back. So there are two constructs that come to mind. We could have Uranus in the first house being a soul that is suppressing, right? Because many souls with Uranus in transit and natal will just suppress that impulse. So I'm just going to be normal. I'm going to do the things that I do. And we'll often find Uranus in the first house, there'll be sort of metaphorical characteristics. Maybe I'm not living that adventurous life, but I'm really into motorcycles, right? Or I'm like really into the Matrix series. Anything that represents some kind of adventure. So it's like an archetype that I can associate with that reflects this quality of individuality, or like action heroes. Obsessions with archetypes and things that are just totally intangible that maybe only 5 people are into, that's a very Uranian thing. A part of it being, it represents essential qualities within us that maybe we're not actualized, so we just live it out in these other ways. So there can be a suppression. And when all of that energy in the first house is suppressed, and why would it be suppressed? Well, the ramifications of embracing one's desire nature, first house, one's will, that could be violent. There can be subconscious memories of violence, being bullied, being attacked, being hurt, or memories of the past where one themselves was violent. I don't want to be violent. I'm going to suppress all of that. So there can be a lot of suppressed content and fear relative to that individuating impulse. And that can lead to, obviously there's a whole bag of health issues that we can look at there. But on the most basic psychological level, a loss of energy, loss of stamina, a dissociation, which is a Uranus keyword, from one's sexuality, from one's drive or will for life. There can be just this sense of being checked out, being dissociative. One Uranian tendency in general, shadow dynamic tendency, is dissociation. And so the archetype of, smoking a lot of marijuana or just kind of checking out, while all that can be Neptune Pisces, it's also Uranus from the perspective of we don't want to actually face the content that we're suppressing. So I can stay cool, chill, cool, get along with everyone, be friendly to everyone, great, but like you're suppressing a whole lot of content. Okay, that situation where there's suppression can easily lead to a period in time where the soul is manifesting extreme experiences of violence or confrontation or fear, either manifesting just within their own consciousness, events happening in their life, or they manifest a period of time where they're accessing a level of fear, paranoia, or rage, and they don't know where it's coming from. And these can be difficult times, very, very common, and everyone should just take note of this. The famous midlife crisis, Uranus oppositions, early 40s, more or less. This can be a really stressful time for a lot of souls. So that's one example of suppression. The other example, as you're speaking, Kristin, is I'm not going to be limited or suppressed in any way at all. And so that's where the soul is needing to learn to liberate from reactivity. A good mnemonic for understanding Uranus in any signature is liberate from, then fill in the blank. What's the shadow of first house? Reactivity. Liberation from anger. And it's not even liberation from anger, it's also liberating the anger, right? Ultimately, it all has to move, but if it's suppressed, it's not moving. But if we're identified with it, we can be in a constant state of anger and fight or flight. So it's liberating from that reactive state and cultivating observer. And this is something Jeff Green often taught. What's happening now is not what happened then. This moment fundamentally has no precedent. It's different. What makes it different is that it's now. And the only thing that recreates the past over and over and over and over again is our own thinking and our conditioned reactions to event, to stimuli, which is when we're going through these traumatic experiences and contents are arising, it's tempting and often seems reasonable or expected to have the same reaction that we would have and to expect the same stimulus to act in a certain way according to the past. But these are actual moments. They're pivot points where we can liberate and see it all as an observer. What's emerging, what's being liberated, what's being freed up. So those are two ways of thinking of the Uranus first house.
Well, let me set that up because every archetype has, we all have work to do within every archetype, right? There's a light and a shadow. So the shadow of Aries is reaction, defensiveness, this immediate reactivity that can happen when something gets triggered. And as we evolve and we're learning, if you have a strong Aries signature anywhere, is you're learning the art of response. And so the evolution of Uranus and Aries would be to respond versus react. And that requires stopping, taking a big breath, Uranus, a deep breath, taking a few if you need to, count to 10 if you need to, and you will have a completely different response than you did if you just let yourself react in that moment. Part of the challenge with Uranus and Aries is that, those souls are getting bombarded with an array of instinctual urges, desires, thoughts, and that can come in like lightning, just bombarded. And so what can also happen within these souls is that there can be a cyclic or perpetual identity crisis that's occurring because it's wanting to follow all these different paths. And so I just think there is a strong tendency to react or to be defensive. And these souls, if there's anything impeding this experience for them. But I would say in general too, if you think about the bloodstream being Aries and first house, to have an electric bloodstream, kind of like this image we had that Ari threw up at the beginning of this woman. It's electric bloodstream and it's like the blood coursing through their veins just feels like it's high wire, like a live wire or a high wire. What you feel when you're at a height of elevation and looking over a mountain. I mean, what happens to your nervous system? They can always feel like that all the time, like plugged into another planet in a sense, ready to go, raring to go, never enough. I like your motorcycle example. The need for speed, fighter pilot, I don't know, like there could be, and again, of course, you have to look at the whole chart and all of that. But what happens on a nervous system level? What happens on a bloodstream level? This would be someone with a tendency for higher blood pressure because of this position of Uranus, and having to be ready at the get-go, like ahead of the game, before the gun goes off and you're off to the races. They are gone, right? You've got to be the first one out of the tent when there is danger lurking. that it's that instinct that is a step ahead of other people. And so, it's learning how to use the Uranian gift of observation. They're constantly observing themselves while they're acting, while they're moving, constantly looking at themselves all the time in motion. So to evolve that truly would be watching yourself stop, pause, breathe, observe, and imagine even what's the most evolved expression of what I'm getting triggered by.
That reminds me that the Uranus corresponds to the physiology of the brain. So when we're stuck in trauma reaction, there's an actual physiology there. And that physiology will dominate our perceptions. There's just no way around it. So actually, the immense wisdom and significance of that stopping, taking a step back, which literally and metaphorically corresponds to removing oneself from the immediacy of what's happening and seeing it as a witness, is so significant. It's significant in general for any Mars Aries stuff, but just with Uranus there, because of how real everything can seem. We don't really differentiate between the trauma response that we're experiencing and what's actually happening until we take that step back. One thing that I've often seen with Uranus in the first house or Aries are souls that become very skillful at various martial arts or fighting practices. And we can think of this in two ways. Like on one level, it can be like, these, I'm thinking of the Fight Club right now, if anyone has seen that movie, or just like these like groups that will practice these different martial arts or fighting practices, and but also just the ability to access the whole realm of fight and defense, but from a higher intelligence, right? What is the Mars Aries first house archetype? From a higher, more evolved understanding. That's what Uranus is really all about. It's elevating consciousness beyond a state of separation and self-interest and fighting and warring from humans to humans, but seeing a greater potential for humanity. Uranus is always touching upon what's essential to consciousness, and thus takes us away from the limited thinking that we are so familiar with. So ways of engaging that first house energy that's more evolved. So I think of different martial arts systems where it's really using the body, being very sharp, very efficient, very essential, very skillful, or ways of creating peace, ways of actually bringing people together through conscious activism, right? Uranus and Aries can be fighting this activism because of a higher vision for what's potential for humanity. And that might mean if you're fighting this activism, you're going to be preparing your mind and your body and your actions and your thoughts for the game, for the playing field. You might get put in jail. There might be certain reactions, but if you're holding that higher intelligence, if you're seeing the potential and you have that greater bird's eye point of view, you understand that the things that humans do in the process are expected. It's like staying clear and sharp and single focused in one sense of activism and purpose can be a very powerful expression of Uranus in the first house or Aries. And again, a lot of these souls, though, can come into this life with a strong paranoia linked to that. Like I was fighting in the past, I was a freedom fighter, I was, out at war, and I was, I was bombarded by a group of people, and like there can be all these fears. So really learning how to engage that warrior impulse, not from the fear, not from the paranoia, not from that reactive place. And this reminds me of two expressions of Uranus in general. Oftentimes Uranus can manifest as a soul that's really alone, right? Like we've mentioned several times, a group of one. They're doing their own thing, especially in the first house. There's no precedent. No one even believes you or is interested in you. No one's giving you any attention. You're just in your own world. And they may not have any friends. It's a very common Uranian experience to just be in your own world. And the flip side is also often true. Uranus can often just be your friends, your groups of people, teams that you're a part of. And so this can also correspond to having been a part of community or groups of people where there was group violence, right? Having been leading a group of soldiers out and everyone died, right? And so it's afraid of doing something that will bring up that memory, that subconscious memory of violence and loss. So these are important things to tune into. Where there's an association with groups of people or friends, there's also going to be that constant push and pull between the need to be a part of something, to be included, and that ongoing need to individuate and look within oneself and one's own path, and often the perceived consequences or tensions between the two.
I was just thinking about that Uranus and Aries in the first. I mean, it can manifest in many ways, as you've been sharing. Somebody being at war and dying in some sudden way. But you could, if you think about maybe putting South Node in the 7th or Pluto in the 7th, could be South Node in Libra somewhere, could be a nurse working on the front lines who's experienced all of that. Like, you really do have to look at the whole chart. So when we're talking about the signature, there's a multitude of things that could be ways it could play out. But absolutely, it is inevitably going to be about what you shared too, just feeling alone essentially, but also needing to be a part of something that feels like-minded, at least some of the time, with that Uranus in the first house. So I do feel like even being in relationships can be a unique thing, like not following mainstream models for relationships, maybe having an open relationship, or never marrying potentially because of that. You know, I don't want to be held to some document that says, you know, and certainly a woman with Uranus in the first is not going to want to take the guy's last name. If she does, there's a lot of repression going on, and she's going to be feeling
Most
very
likely.
rebellious about it at some point.
Possibly, yeah.
Why don't you take my name, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's actually a quote from Nikola Tesla, and we will look at his chart today because he was a Uranus in the first.
Oh,
I do not
wow.
think you can name many great inventions that have been made by married men.
Oh my gosh, that is so, I can't believe you found a quote like that. Is so perfect.
I saw that. I'm like,
Oh,
I have to put that in there.
that's awesome. All right. What else? What else do we need to share about this?
Maybe we
I
can
was,
jump into some chart examples. Do you have a thought that arises?
well, I was thinking about him, that something, let's pull up his chart because there's something I do want to say.
Let's do it. Okay. Do we see him?
Let me see here. Yes, there he
All
is.
right.
So did you know, I don't know if you read this, but he was believed to have been born at midnight. I don't know if that's the chart you have. I can't see it, but
Sounds right.
during his birth, lightning struck during a summer storm.
I do
I
know
mean, the
that.
guy is been an inventor for electricity and like hundreds and hundreds of inventions. And so he was given a nickname, Child of the Storm. You think about lightning, that is such a Uranian thing, right? To have that in the first house.
In
I
fact,
thought that, yeah.
someone told his mother that's a bad omen, and his mother said, no, he'll be a child of light, something like that.
A child of light. So his grandmother called him Child of the Storm, but his mother
Right.
said, no, he is a child of the light.
And look at his
And
Lucifer, conjunct
wow.
Uranus.
Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh, I'm sure people definitely felt like he was on another planet. I mean, the guy had, I read somewhere that, you know, he would, it's like he lived 100 lifetimes compared to somebody else. And he had like 300 different patents spanning several countries, from wireless technology to, you know, electric motors, alternating currents, all these different things, everything so advanced. And you can, when you think about 300 different patents and you put a Uranus in Aries or Uranus in the first house, talk about being bombarded constantly by ideas. Like, you are literally plugged into this Uranian energy, and trying to field everything that's coming in. So Anyway, very obviously advanced and using a great deal more of his brain than a lot of us probably are. So,
One thing he said is that before every invention and before any he would ever put or build anything, he would see it clearly in his mind first. And he
um,
made a statement in his older years. He never once ever either was it made a mistake or had an experience where the product wasn't what he envisioned it. And that's such a and that I was really inspired by that teaching, because to have clear thought is a Uranian thing. Clear thinking is to be seeing the archetypal dynamics, the energies. It's having clear observer mind first, not just jumping in to do something. Right? So this is soul, and Uranus and Taurus in the first house. You can just say sitting. He loved the solitude. It's all over his chart. Sitting quietly, spending most of his day thinking. That's what he did. Most of his day was spent thinking. Most of his life was spent thinking. But that thinking wasn't an idle wasting away of thinking. It was really what we can say is true, functional, useful thought. It reminds me of an experience where I was officiating a wedding, and I had all these notes to speak for the wedding, and I lost the notes. And the wedding, I'm sitting there, and the wedding's going to begin in like 5 minutes. So I just sat and I mentally went over everything that I wanted to say. I visualized the bullet points, and then I spoke, and it all came through. And that's actually something that I've learned to do before classes, before teaching, before anything like this, to connect with the energies first, get the essence. And obviously I have Uranus and Sag in the third. So this is very relevant for me. It's freeing myself up from all the information and data points and getting into clear thought. But it reminds me of that. His ability to see what's possible by actually holding all of that in his mind. So this Uranus and Taurus in the first house, there's a lot to unpack here. And he's a Pluto first house soul as well. So a big part of his evolutionary journey was that individuation. He's here to do his own thing and to be very content in that, to follow his own path, not worry about precedent. A big part of his soul journey, it was fascinating to study him. I love these things that we do because I get to learn about all these cool people. Such a fascinating guy. And when I Googled Tesla and I looked for images, I must have seen well over 100 pictures of cars before one picture of him. I had to type in Nikola Tesla. So cars are more famous than the man that invented alternating currents and wireless technologies. Also, he's responsible for X-rays. So many things that he's brought into the world right now for us to even be doing what we're doing right now. And in a very Neptune and Pisces in the 11th house characteristic way, no one has any clue about him. It's after he dies where the genius becomes more evident and more known. So this is a big dynamic here, bringing the future into the present. He had a strong sense to keep on going, keep on going. And a big part of his soul journey was being duped and taken advantage of by people that had special interests. I was very amazed to hear about his relationship with Thomas Edison, who's known as the inventor of the DC current, the direct current, and the light bulb. He wasn't. He didn't really invent much of anything, as far as I'm aware. Maybe, I think he invented the electric chair, which used a DC direct current. It's like the one invention that I think Thomas Edison had was to kill people. Thomas Edison was a business person, and he took other people's patents, bought them, and used them to profit and to make them. So what Thomas Edison did and what he was good at was commercializing, which is what made things accessible and available. He brought everything into the mainstream. When Thomas Edison and Tesla were together, Tesla was working for Edison, and Thomas Edison took advantage of Tesla, didn't pay him for his work and this thing that he said he was going to pay him for, and eventually became more and more of a rival of Tesla when Tesla started his own company and tried to make alternating currents more prominent, which it eventually did become. Alternating currents can move electricity over greater distances, where there are many issues with direct currents which didn't have as much power. Thomas Edison would hold these public events where he would electrocute and kill animals, including an elephant, publicly with alternating currents to demonstrate that AC is dangerous. So he did all these things to discredit Tesla because he didn't want to lose the profit and the fame and the power that he had from DC being the main prominent electrical use. And this is just, he's creating something new. And Tesla was all about, he didn't care about profit. You could say Uranus and Taurus, freeing himself from personal gain. When he patented so many inventions, and some of his patents were eventually used to make alternating current mainstream in the world, and he gave it away entirely. He tore up his, whatever would have given him any money. And as a result, the people that worked with AC has, for the rest of Tesla's life, supported him to keep on living in a motel. But he didn't keep anything for himself. And it just sort of led to a place where the lower thinking of humanity, and this learning about him really made me think about how anything Uranian is always going to bring this up, always. The lower base selfish thinking of humanity is always going to emerge in the face of liberated thought. Because liberated thought is always going to be liberated relative to the status quo, which on some level has always been about commercial gain and profit. And there's a quote here. Here, I'll just pull this up to share the quote. Actually, I don't know if something about free energy will never become supported by the commercial world. Like free energy will never become something that the mainstream or the commercial world supports because it doesn't benefit them. So that constant confrontation between he wanted energy to be free. His vision was an idea of wireless technology that he believed would bring peace. And that's also like that naivety of Neptune in the 11th house. Higher technologies will reveal our unity. It will dissolve the boundaries and the borders between nations. He's true and right on some level, but there's always the fact that selfish cause will always find ways to use it and take advantage of it. And so all these technologies have been helpful, but also incredibly dangerous and hurtful as well. And I think that's an important Uranus teaching for Uranus anywhere. Technology won't save humanity. Greater inventions, that's not where the future is. Well, obviously the future is in more innovations, but it's not where our salvation is. Salvation is in the truth, is in our awakening, is in our liberation, which points back to our fundamental and essential nature. Artificial intelligence, the internet technologies, wireless technologies, none of that inherently will bring peace. That's one of the teachings of Uranus, the limitations of the human brain. We have the capacity to think in resonance with the mind of God and to access higher intelligence and to bring that out in how we're creating life. But that isn't ever going to replace, it's never going to bring us to the source. We can evolve our intelligence, but that's never going to take us home. That's a big humbling, and that's a very common learning, I feel, for a lot of Uranian people who make inventions and then people go and do horrible things with those inventions. So let's come back to his chart for a moment.
Well,
actually, yeah, go for it.
It's a great teaching along those lines that we talk about in EA, which is, it's incredible for someone to have a mind like that and a capacity like that, but there's a limit to what any mind can access, right? Through that, even that third house, you can see there's a limit to how much the soul can grow in any given life in terms of its intellectual capacity, but we evolve ultimately through the emotional body, not through the mind. And so at some point, you can see the Cancer planets in his third house. I can't see the chart right now, but
yeah, I'll share it again.
They're there. And those Cancer planets are squaring, I think, a Moon, Mars, and Libra. Is that it?
Yep.
So
I'm pulling up some quotes to share as well.
He's avoiding the emotional body. He's just what is the most valuable thing to him is being able to sit and think about all these things that he can create to be innovative in the world. So anyway, yeah, so you've got Venus squaring Moon, Mars, and Libra in the sixth house. I mean, that's like, just like the first quote you said. What'd you say? No good invention was ever invented by a married man or
Yeah, something like
something.
that. So he says.
Then you got it. His Pluto's in the first house, right on the ascendant in Taurus. I can't think of it in combination with some of these other things, a bigger signature for a loner. But the polarity is in the seventh house. You know, ultimately he will need to involved in working with people, and obviously was very much betrayed on that level with his involvement with Edison. So eventually he will have to dip into those waters, but
Yeah, there's a lot here around the neglect of the emotional body, and subservient conditions where he was taken advantage of and had to work for other. I mean, just the working for others and then being taken advantage of because of his efforts is very clear with that Mars on the south node, and all that Cancer square in the nodes. So here's a couple of quotes here. All that was great in the past was ridiculed, condemned, combated, suppressed, only to emerge all the more powerfully, all the more triumphantly from the struggle. Uranus in the first house. I mean, it's you're struggling to move forward. You have this path to walk. There are going to be obstacles. People are going to condemn it, combat it, suppress it. And he knew it's all going to emerge. He knew the future of humanity. He even made predictions. He had the ability to see clearly and then to act and create from that clear seeing. He knew what was going on, but also limited because no one can see anything and everything perfectly clearly. When one man calls God, another calls the law of physics, and that reminds me of that Neptune. Invention is the most important product of man's creative brain. The ultimate purpose is the complete mastery of mind over the material world, the harnessing of human nature to human needs. It's just meaningful to recognize that as well with Uranus and Taurus, which we'll speak about next month, using the natural resources for the betterment of mankind. And so meaningful to just point out that very dynamic where using these natural resources can then also become a detriment to humankind, to the earth, I mean, we just see all the pollution created from all the space clutter, all the devastation to mine the minerals that we use for these batteries that we create. I was looking a little bit into Elon Musk and why he called his company Tesla. And my understanding is he really appreciates that Tesla is the one that made these batteries possible, which are based on alternating current technology. But he also said, and this is very characteristic of Elon Musk, he really appreciates Edison because Edison did the kind of work that made these technological advancements accessible and grounded and applicable to the mainstream. Whereas Tesla wasn't a business person. Obviously, Musk is a businessman. Tesla wasn't a businessman. He was just wanting to invent. So it's just a very interesting observation of the interface between the Saturn and Uranian energies. One more thing I want to point out is that Chiron in Aquarius in the 10th house, which speaks to it so perfectly, right? Being wounded by the mainstream authorities and, the policies and how, so he basically invented radio waves. He made 17 patents, which were then used by, what is that guy's name? Mercona? I forgot the guy that's credited to have invented radio. Who was credited to have invented radio because he used the patents that Tesla made, and Tesla freely said, yes, please use these patents. And then this guy, Mercona, won the, what's that award that you get for like humanity for like doing great things? Nobel Prize.
yeah.
And Tesla was so infuriated and he sued this guy. It wasn't until Tesla died that he was officially recognized as the actual inventor of the radio. So it's just the being wounded by mainstream society and others that had their own special interests involved. It's just really characteristic in this chart.
Definitely, I don't feel like he was attached to being famous. He just wanted things to be fair.
He wasn't attached, but he was definitely hurt by the selfishness and the greed.
Sure.
It really impacted
People
him.
that are stealing his inventions and putting their name on it and things like that. it's interesting, you know, he has very few, he only has Neptune retrograde, and Neptune in the 11th. He's one of the most Uranian characters. I mean, when I think about, and just the mind that he has. So there's not this deluge of Uranian signatures here, but Uranus in the first, it shows you the power of that placement. And is it
Yes,
trining the midheaven? I can't quite tell if that's a trine, but
it is.
um,
Yeah,
it is, you know, it's sextiling that Neptune. Uranus is sextiling the Neptune, trining the midheaven. I mean, if you look at him, he's dressed in his suit. He looks very Capricornian that way, kind of conservative in his dress. But what's coming through his eyes, and just the nature of how he lived his life, of course, was that Taurus, Uranus, Aries combination. So it's not like, you know, sometimes we see strong Uranian types and they dress differently, they act differently. They, you know, I think he was doing what he could to appear, you know, to work within the mainstream, you know, in terms of that. But very little, I was surprised to see such very few signatures that connect to the Uranus
it's true.
archetype.
Well, that Chiron squaring Pluto is pretty strong. And then that
Yeah.
Uranus rules that Chiron. You know, one thing too is towards the end of his life, he lived in a motel, and he was very hermited. Fascinatingly, had very little money, was supported by the people that he sold the AC patent to. I think that's what it was. So he was generously supported to survive, but hardly had anything for himself. He was practically world famous at a certain point in his life, and then practically forgotten. Even when he had one of the biggest impacts on humanity in recent history. He lived as a hermit, continuing to invent. I mean, just if you want to look, everyone should just research what are the inventions of Tesla. It's profound. And
Massive.
he
Yeah,
had
like
this really beautiful relationship to this one pigeon. And he invented a machine that would heal a pigeon. This one pigeon that he had this deep love for would come and he would call this pigeon. This pigeon, a female pigeon, would come, and they had a deep love, a deep bond. And he really cared for her and healed her with this machine that I forgot what the issue was. That's Uranian. I mean, it's like
very out there.
he's like, I'm doing my own thing. Yeah, this is a relationship with a pigeon. I don't care if it's a human or not. It's just it's and I think that's also really beautiful too. Just so sweet. And I feel that Cancer in there, especially
Oh, yeah.
how much hurt there may have been within the human emotional realm, right? And just having that relationship to a pigeon, it's just something that I feel a lot of tenderness when I hear that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's such a softness in that, in the Cancer Venus, um, Sun, Venus, and Cancer, excuse me. Remembering too that Saturn's in Cancer, which is conditioning every other planet. So that's a lot of Cancer
Yes.
energy. That's a lot of
Yeah.
underdeveloped, a lot of emotional arrestment within that signature.
Yes. Especially with
Yeah,
that
so
Libra moon in the 6th. I mean, the I would say the degree to which he was impacted emotionally by the rejection, by the inferiority, by the ways he was treated by other people, when his nature is to be trusting and giving. I think that was something that is probably a lot stronger than we might imagine with all that Cancer Libra.
yeah.
So
All
Ram
right.
Dass, beloved Ram Dass,
Yeah, Pluto on the ascendant again.
another Pluto on the ascendant, such is the theme today. And he's a Uranus in Aries. So not the first house, but it squares the Pluto in the first. So he has very prominent Uranus Aries signature. Obviously conjunct the sun, conjunct the North Node in Aries. It's like basically a sign that this soul comes into this life with the intention to accelerate their own evolutionary growth, to go quicker, faster in their own awakening. He's an example of a soul that I feel has gone through such profound and pronounced phases of personal transformation, where each phase was like a complete experience, right? The Harvard professor, the LSD experimenter, the seeker in India, and the spiritual awakening, to have like a deeper awakening to the nature of consciousness and nature of reality, and to begin to really cultivate a true spiritual path, right? Realizing his true self. And I just see this soul as a deeply humble soul that took that Aries energy, to keep on going. And what's that sun? Here's a great point. Sun Uranus conjunction. It cannot and should not stop. It needs to actualize and find out who it is, not according to who it's become and what it's achieved or how it's known. It wants to strip away and actualize its essential capacity, its essential nature. If you're taking that into a spiritual state, it really takes the soul deeper into observer mind, deeper into witnessing one's essential self and not wanting to settle for the metaphor of, oh, I'm a well-known Harvard professor, or I'm a well-known, LSD person, or I'm, famous and got all these cool friends in cool places and I'm upper class. It's, I want to go deeper into actualizing and knowing my true self. Of course, Aries revolutionized, brought forward spirituality in such a significant way. You can say 10th house Aries, he's the father of modern spirituality. We can say that in some ways with his book Be Here Now and the teachings from the East that he made accessible to the masses. Uranus is what Jeff Green called social contagion, something that's emerging in one part of the world or with one group of people, but it happens everywhere because Uranus is manifesting not in the way that physics manifests, like this hurts me. It's manifesting energetically. It's a theme emerging within consciousness, and it's not local, it's universal. And so it's like, so anything that manifests on a cultural level, manifesting everywhere throughout the world. And we're going to find particularly Uranian people that will oftentimes be symbols. Another Uranus and Aries person is Elvis. He had Uranus and Aries in the 5th house. So of course he was an icon of like sexuality and creativity and revolutionized a whole era of music and freedom, even sexual freedom for many young people. So we'll have these souls that have these Uranian archetypes in their chart that are almost like catalyzing or symbolizing these collective themes of evolution and change. So he brought all of this into the world, and it's a great example of a soul that's just in this constant change, this constant evolutionary process. And Uranus and Aries keep on going, keep on moving.
Don't look back, really. Although, I think about Aries, the Aries archetype, oftentimes is learning to pause and reflect upon how far it's come versus just forcing it forward all the time. And when I look at Ram Dass's chart too, it kind of reminds me of stained glass with all the different pieces of glass and colors, all these different lives of his, past lives of his that he lived, he tried to heal in one life, multiple lives in one life. I think of Ram Dass, multiple characters of who he's been, and healing all of the broken pieces of who he's been and bringing it together in one beautiful final product, and reminding people of the power of healing through a spiritual focus and a spiritual walk. And he was one who would, through his life, through everything that's happened to him, didn't he get paralyzed? Was that?
He had a stroke, which is also your radiant thing.
Uranus is a stroke.
Says he was stroked by his guru.
Right. So, he just in terms of what he endured and what he overcame, right. So he had to learn to talk again. He had to learn to move his body again. It's like being reborn, massive rebirth over and over and over again. That's the Pluto ascendant. I would say the same is true for Tesla. Anytime anyone's got Pluto rising, it's going to be a massive metamorphic life, multiple lives within one life.
Yeah.
So you put that with the Sun Uranus conjunction in the 10th, and it is like, how fast can we rip through all of these, this unfinished business that I just want to put to rest?
Mm-hmm.
How fast can we get it done? Yeah. Wow. It was impressive.
Even his post, there's all these different, there's like the spiritual teacher pre-stroke and the spiritual teacher post-stroke. It's like every phase of his life was its own thing. And just the realization just kept on going deeper and deeper and deeper.
When you think of Saturn cycles, they're every 7 years. And Uranus it takes 84 years for Uranus to go all the way around the zodiac. So it'll spend, is it about 7 years per sign, Uranus?
Actually, it's because it's a little bit elliptical, it's different.
Okay, so it depends on what sign it's in. But it's about that. But if you look at his life, and you divide, well, the archetypes, 12 into that 84, depending on how long they are in each sign, I would bet if you could map his life, and as it shifts archetypes, something new is happening
Oh
again,
yeah.
And so one thing that I heard recently, a client shared with me, that she's met somebody that she knew in the past, and they reconnected after many years of not seeing each other. And they're going to have a ceremony of sorts. I said, "Are you going to get married?" And they're in their 60s and 70s. She's in her 60s, he's in his 70s, and she said, "No, we're just going to walk each other home." And I literally started to cry. I thought that was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard in my entire life. And she said, "I can't take credit for those words, those Ram Dass said these
Yeah,
words."
that's a
And
beautiful.
so when you South Node in the fourth, I mean, whew, he's got this Cancer rising, Jupiter in Cancer,
Venus and
Cancer
Pisces.
rising too. So I'm just like in a puddle when I hear stuff like that. I can't imagine anything more beautiful. And that really reflects the importance of, he's got Saturn squaring the nodes here. He's also got, it's a wide square, but it's there. Pluto squaring the nodes.
Yeah,
And
Pluto and Jupiter.
yeah, but just to be there, it doesn't have to require marriage, it's just it doesn't have to be a traditional way of being in a relationship. It's how you show up in relationship, walking each other home. I mean, it just brings me back this visual when I was not old enough to drive yet, and walking home with friends, and what that felt like to just be with somebody who's, we're our own people walking toward the same destination. And yet we're sharing a space together. We are nurturing one another through our evolution, through our walk. And especially when you're getting later in life, and things get harder in many ways as we become older, because the body's breaking down, and people we love are passing away or getting sick. And it's just like the sweetest, most tender thing to say. Walking each other.
So quick reference to the next final chart, just to bring it forward. Kurt Cobain, Uranus and Virgo on the ascendant. And all I want to point out is he brought forth grunge music, Nirvana, and I think the album was Nevermind. That first album basically opened the doors for thousands of indie artists to become successful, to become more known. It's like it revolutionized some people say it was the most profound era of musical development in history, in known history. The changes and the level of new music and creative development that occurred. So, and I don't know why, but Virgo to me reminds me of punk, reminds me of grunge. Maybe, I don't know why, maybe you can help me figure that one out. It just does. And so it just bringing forward this whole path. And there's something about, here's why, in my view, there's something about that music that's a little messy. That's like his music was both incredibly complex and intricate. Like the chord progressions are brilliant and beautiful, and it really strayed from how people made music. And of course, his opposite Mercury and Pisces and in the sixth, there's just a genius to his how he performed and how he worked with the instrument of the guitar. But there's also this like messy, like imperfect quality to it that's also its own like level of intelligence that it defines the nature of this music, and also defines a subculture. I think many of the souls that were born at this time in the 60s with that Uranus-Pluto conjunction, or Uranus and Virgo, are the souls that were coming of age in the 80s or in the 70s and 80s, and really dealing with just the nature of the conservative movements in the world at that time, and needing to really define themselves, and individuate and know themselves. This is after the Pluto and Leo generation, so which had a lot of wealth, which had a lot of power, which was very much self-centered. And the Virgo generation was like this whole other movement that were needing to really define themselves in a new way. So this is just an example of a soul that I really feel is almost like the poster child for the Uranus Virgo energy and even the Pluto and Virgo generation, bringing forward a whole new movement that allowed for a new level of freedom of expression, accessing dimensions of our being that were otherwise suppressed. Like that music makes something available that wasn't experienced and wasn't known. And also just the idea of independent artists, Uranus, first house, becoming more known. He was a part of this independent art scene in Seattle, which up until that time, that wasn't like the mainstream musical world, but he made that again, cultural icon, social contagion. This opened up a whole era of creative development and musical development and social development that didn't exist prior.
Another Pluto on the ascendant, but this time it's
That's
in the
again,
12th.
it's funny how that happens.
I mean, Pluto in the 12th in combination can also be like massive fame, but and his music for sure. Like you only need hearing a few notes of it, you know exactly who it is.
Why do you have any insights as to why Virgo corresponds to punk and grunge?
Virgo punk.
It's a
I think so,
knowing that I have that I can't quite.
Really? Well, Virgo, I mean, punk sound for me was always very Uranian because, I could still remember my parents just horrified when that came out, when punk rock came out, and just everyone them spiking their hair. And I don't see it as Virgo. I don't, or
Or
maybe they feel like the
Uranus and
underdogs.
Virgo in particular.
Yeah, I'm feeling like the underdogs, just rebelling and I don't know. Did you call it? Did you call it Virgo, or you're just?
Uranus,
Or
yeah,
did
this is just my own mind. I think maybe one reason why I have that association too is like Uranus and Virgo and Pluto and Virgo too. It's like this isn't clean. This isn't all tidy and put. I'm liberating from the cultural
Yeah,
ideas of
I
what
love
it looks
that.
to be proper and right. I'm going to do it differently. You
Exactly.
really put, yeah, that's a part of it. And it
I'm
wasn't like,
gonna look like
well, there's something about the production of Virgo and then the Uranus and Virgo being like, I'm going to throw all that out of the window. New techniques, new ways of doing everything. Yeah.
it's shock value, Ari. It's shock value for sure. Punk rock, is just like they were just wowing people and shocking people and saying, it's fine to be different. It's better to be different. What are you gonna come up with next? So I think that was part of it too, and just giving people permission to be who they are.
Yeah. So there's also a quote here that I wanted to share. 'Cause I was just like looking online to see. Nevermind brought punk to the masses and ignited an entire generation. Its success broke the levee and helped launch 1,000 alternative bands. Nirvana kicked off the big bang of grunge music that also thrust their Seattle peers, such as Soundgarden, Alice in Chains, and Pearl Jam, into the limelight, crystallizing the scene as it had now come to be known as one of the biggest musical and cultural groundswells in music history, a decade-defining moment.
I think when I hear the word punk, I don't even think of those bands.
Yeah,
I
they're
think
not.
of the
They
more
weren't punk, but I think it opened up the doors for punk.
right,
Yeah,
absolutely.
they were not
Yeah,
punk. They were grunge.
yeah. I love Nirvana. I love Pearl Jam.
Yeah, it's such good music.
It really is so clever as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I like what you said. It's just like it opens a door inside of you. Just listening to the music, to that kind of music, but for all of us, music's such a universal language, and it really induces an experience or allows us to feel something we weren't feeling before we were hearing the music, right?
Oh, you know what it reminds me of? It's breaking free from the Judeo-Christian puritanical ways. That's what it is. It's so anti-puritanical. That's Uranus
Oh,
and
so
Virgo.
true.
That's what it
Okay,
is.
that makes sense to
That's
me.
what it is.
That's it. You
Yeah.
nailed it.
Yeah.
Okay, we definitely put a bow on this one today.
Great.
All right. So I suppose we can wrap up.
Yep.
I just wanted to remind people again, if you're listening to this anytime in January, if there's anything that you haven't addressed under this transit that you would like to work within your own psyche and soul, and really confront something that's been surfacing and floating around in your now conscious state. Something that was subconscious is now conscious. Do yourself a favor and tackle it this month, and you will be feeling set free in many ways.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Any last
Great.
thoughts for you?
Just a reminder, we did an intro talk to Uranus that you can also find.
Mhm.
It'll probably be all one playlist, but definitely check out that intro talk just to learn a little more about Uranus archetype in general. And we'll be
That
back
sounds
next
great.
week with Uranus in the second or Taurus.
Next month.
Next month.
Next week, we'll be back in early February to talk about Uranus and Taurus or the second house. Thanks, Ari. It was so much fun.
Yes, thank you.
Namaste.